Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writer's Gym. An author, journalist, teacher, researcher, memoirist and novelist who it's been an enormous privilege to work with on Greening-sponsored Write for Macmillan Cancer Support over the last 3 years is the award-winning Jennifer Steil. On her wonderful Substack newsletter, Jennifer's biography is now award-winning author and ovarian-cancer-wrangler. In that newsletter and in this conversation, you will hear a lot about how writing becomes even more important to mental health in Jennifer's life now, and what Greening-sponsored Write is about, as well as the awards, the real life experiences that have led to the fiction and the memoir. Meet Jennifer Steil. I'm really, really happy that I have you for the podcast and for the Sponsored Write.
I am thrilled to be here with you as always.
I identified enormously with what you said in your last Liminal post about how work is the thing that you can do when you can't do anything else, that writing is so central. So I'd really love to talk to you about that. Obviously, you know a great deal more about Macmillan Cancer Support than I actually do. I've been fundraising for them for a long time.
Writing has never felt like more of a life preserver when I'm drowning. I mean, that's a cliche metaphor, but I have always written most days out of a compulsion to record things and make notes and have a career. But now that's not why I sit down to write. Now I sit down to write because otherwise I feel like I will drop dead on the spot. I sit down to write because I don't know how else I'm going to survive the next few hours. And this has certainly been the case in the last week, where things just got so bad. There was literally nothing else I could do. There was nothing else that would allow me to either process, which actually wasn't what I needed to do. I just needed to be deep inside of a novel of a different world, and to be working on that and feel like I was doing something that I'm actually good at, and to be reminded of the fact that I am not merely a cancer patient. I am also a writer, and I am still a writer, and it hasn't taken that away from me yet. Thank goodness, because it's a survival technique more than anything else at the moment. And it's never felt like that before.
I am your friend. I am your reader. I am a fellow writer. There are lots of angles that I have enormously appreciated, not just so many things you have done. You are many kinds of writer, and your life and your work have intersected in a lot of ways. Are you happy to sort of give us background?
I am very happy to give you background. I actually started out as an actor and not a writer. I'd always kept a journal. I don't know why I always kept a journal, but I'd always kept a journal. But I majored in theater as an undergraduate and then worked as an actor in the theater for several years. And I think that's one of the many things you and I share, is a love for both theater and all other kinds of creative writing and performing and all that. And so I became a writer largely in response to the kinds of roles that I was getting as a young woman. I became very frustrated with always being cast as the young ingenue or the prostitute with a heart of gold. All these characters didn't seem to have much autonomy or a brain of their own or ambition. And that bothered me. I felt that my life felt confined in those spaces. And I thought, I need to get out of them somehow. And I got a flyer in the mail for a writing workshop and rang the guy running it and said, I can't afford to pay what you're charging, but I really want to take it. And he said, well, could you pay me $5 a week? And I said, yes. And so that was my first writing workshop. And then I eventually went to grad school, got an MFA, realized I was still going to be starving to death. So I got an MS in journalism, worked in newspapers for a long time, then switched to magazines where I worked for a longer time, all the while still performing in New York City largely, and then moved to Yemen to become the editor of a newspaper. And that first year there, inspired my first book, which was a memoir called The Woman Who Fell from the Sky. And it was the most remarkable and challenging year of my entire life. And it definitely changed everything for me. At the end of that year, I met my husband. I had my daughter in Yemen. We were there for 4 years. And during that time, I started writing my second book, which was a novel called The Ambassador's Wife, which was inspired by my experience of diplomatic life, which was a very bizarre world to be thrown into because I married the then British ambassador to Yemen.
And that's a very dignified way of saying the novel about kidnap was based on your experiences.
Right. So I was kidnapped when I was 6.5 months pregnant with my daughter. And that experience is what was the initial germ for The Ambassador's Wife, and which was not my narrative, but it started out with the way that I was kidnapped was very similar to the way my main character gets kidnapped right in the very beginning. Not a spoiler. You find this out right away. But then, whereas I was released after a mere day of being held at the end of 8 AK-47s. And I imagined, well, what would it have been like had I not been released? Okay, so I was hiking. I hiked all the time in Yemen. And by the time this happened, I had been hiking all over Yemen with a group of friends, with a group of Yemenis every Monday and with a group of other friends sometimes on weekends. And I had never encountered anything but hospitality and warmth and friendliness. And so I actually wasn't worried at all about my safety in Yemen. I had become quite at home in the country. I felt more welcome there than I was anywhere else on the planet, frankly. And then one day I went hiking with 4 other women who I hadn't really been hiking with before. Maybe we'd gone once before. And we were about 2.5 miles hike from the road when we ended up surrounded by a sheikh of a local tribe and 8 other men or 7 other men holding AK-47s who surrounded us and wanted to corral us into a building. I was the only one of the 5 of us who spoke any Arabic. So I introduced myself to the sheikh and tried to tell him that we didn't want a problem and that we were happy to be moving along if we were on their land. You know, when you look at someone and you can tell that they are mentally ill in some way, they're just not there behind their eyes. It was this visible disconnect from reality. And I could tell that he didn't see me and that I didn't register to him as a human being. And that was probably the most frightening moment of my life when I realized that actually it didn't matter at all to him if I lived or died. It didn't matter to him that I was pregnant. It didn't matter to him that I was a woman. It just didn't register. I did have a bodyguard with me. I had 1 bodyguard. My husband had 10, which tells you something about our relative importance, at least in the British government's eyes. And my bodyguard was very busy negotiating. He was, of course, armed to the teeth, but he knew better than to draw a weapon. You don't draw a weapon on Yemenis because they are all armed. And if you draw a weapon on them, there will be a shootout and you will probably die. So you really want to avoid drawing a weapon, no matter how good you are with them. And our bodyguards were very good with them. So he was negotiating. And I ended up calling my husband, who normally I could never reach during the day because he wasn't allowed to take his cell phone into the embassy for security reasons. And I could remember his cell phone number, but not the embassy number. So I rang the cell phone number and he just happened to be in our house and happened to be hosting a luncheon for security services. And thus immediately got to work mobilizing people in Yemen, mobilizing the Minister of the Interior to call the sheikh of the local tribe because they figured out where we were. Because, of course, the bodyguards had recce'd the area, so they knew where we were going to be walking, which was allegedly a safe area. It's not an area where kidnappings have ever happened before. It's not an area where there are terrorists or known terrorists. And this wasn't a terrorist kidnapping. This was opportunistic. They saw a bunch of foreigners. They thought, we're going to hold them captive until we can get something interesting in return. Maybe we could get money or cement or other housing materials, which are expensive in Yemen. But also, right before this, 9 foreigners had been taken hostage in the north of Yemen, and many of them just lined up and executed, shot. And so I was sure that that was what was going to happen to us. And this meant that I was pretty stressed. And because I was 6.5 months pregnant and stress brings on premature labor, I started having contractions. And this terrified me more than anything else, because even if I were to survive the experience, it would be meaningless if my daughter didn't also survive the experience. And I thought, I can't control whether or not I live or die, but I may be able to control whether or not I go into premature labor in the middle of nowhere in Yemen, where 1 out of 6 women dies in childbirth. So I had been doing some pregnancy yoga in an effort to calm myself down, because calm has never been a word that anyone would use to describe me. So I started doing my yoga breathing and chanting to her, stay in, like a little mantra, stay in, it is not safe out here. And did that kind of the rest of the afternoon. And the other women, most of them were older than I was. They'd been through things like this before, and they were incredibly calm. All the women were incredibly calm, incredibly together, protective of me because I was pregnant. There was a very young Romanian woman who I think was scared witless, but was calm. And she's the one who loaned me her phone because mine had disappeared. So if not for her phone, I wouldn't have been able to call my husband. But anyway, at the end of the day, we were eventually let go. And by the evening, the contractions did slow, and I was able to carry my daughter to term. So that experience has had kind of a lasting effect on my life, not only because I got a book out of it. I had to write down exactly what had happened for the British Foreign Office. So I already had a record of exactly what had happened to me. And I thought, well, I've written it all down now. Surely I can do something with this. I don't want this to have been wasted time. So that's when I started asking this series of what if questions. What if she weren't returned? What if the country were on the verge of a civil war? What if she left a toddler behind? What if her husband then lost his post because he wasn't impartial enough to investigate her disappearance, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how The Ambassador's Wife came to be. But it's recurred. Like, I thought after I finished that book, right, okay, done with that. I processed that experience. We can move on. We can all move on. And yet, I remember a time I was at a writing conference in Italy, and I stood up. I was in a talk on how journalists can protect themselves from danger in war zones. And I stood up at some point to talk about my experience in Yemen, being kidnapped, because we were talking about what to do when you're kidnapped and how to manage being held hostage if you're a journalist in a country, et cetera. And so I stood up to talk about my experience, and I stopped breathing. Just stopped breathing. And I mean, that had not happened. Like, I just, I was fine. I'm fine all the time. I don't think I have PTSD or anything like that, but I don't know. It's just, there've been a few times where most of the time, I tell this story all the time. Like 1,000 times I tell it, I'm fine. And then the 1,001st time I tell it, something weird happens. But the other thing that's been happening is I keep writing about it, and the story keeps getting shorter. And it's as if I'm trying to squeeze it into smaller and smaller and smaller space. And I think somewhere in my computer, I have a 100-word version of it, just in an effort to compress it so that I can put it in a smaller part of my brain. But when I think about it, it doesn't consciously bother me. And I know how lucky I am because I escaped, and I have friends and colleagues who have been held for much longer. So I'm aware of my own good fortune, and I feel silly complaining about a mere day at the end of 8 AK-47s.
There's something important for not just women writers, but I hear it more with women writers, that there is that sense of comparison, that because somebody might have something worse, that means anything about our own experience or right to our own experience. And a couple of things I was thinking simultaneously as you were describing that. From a writing exercise point of view, that when something has happened and in the police report scenario, you do a really good plot diagram. You go, this happened, so that happened, this happened and then that happened, and it's causation, and this is the timeline. And I did a police report when I was 18 for domestic violence, and I do remember the discipline of that, where it's good writing training because you are separating what happened from how you feel about what happened. And it did happen. And sometimes, I don't know if you found this, but I find that getting somebody to look at that character, she did this and she did that, and then sometimes you go, oh, do you know what? There's a reason this character is having that emotional reaction. Okay, fair enough. And the fact that it's not about somebody having it better or worse, it's about our right to our experience without feeling that, in a million ways, the only competition or comparison is with oneself.
That's true. And I do find myself saying that to other people all the time, because of course we don't take our own advice. To people who say to me, I don't want to tell you my problems because you have ovarian cancer and you have enough on your plate. I'm like, no. You don't understand. I can't imagine anything better than to think about someone else's problems. And I don't think your problems are less important because I have cancer. I honestly don't. I honestly am just as interested in my friends' lives than ever. Like I don't want people to stop talking to me at a honest and real level just because they worry that their complaints won't equal ovarian cancer. I mean, that's a high bar.
It's a high bar, and I'm really grateful and glad that you communicate that so clearly, because it is a thought process I was conscious of having, and hearing you say that and it just making such utter sense. And I remember voice noting you when I was sitting on Wandsworth Town train station and just telling you the sort of everyday crap that was going on, as in the train is all of 5 minutes late and it's cold and I'm going to the cinema tomorrow. And you said something actually that I don't know if when I say this out loud it will seem as quite as linked as it feels to me, but having heard you say it is important to keep telling me what is going on, however trivial it may seem to me if I say it, it's still important to keep saying it. And what I absolutely loved that I treasure as a thought process is you then said something along the lines of, that's so glamorous that you're going to Olympics Juniors CFL. And I was like, Jennifer, you're teaching in Paris and you live in a million different countries and you speak lots of languages, and I'm going to the cinema, and yes, I live in London, but I'm basically just going to the cinema. But that very, it's not a technique, but a writing technique. When you hear it in somebody else's life, when you're looking at a character doing a thing, it suddenly becomes that bit more glamorous. And the way we tell our stories about ourselves and to each other, just both those aspects felt enormously important, because there is the first, which is, yes, you tell your friends about your life. No, it is not about them, having problems that mean that your problems aren't interesting anymore or something like that. But it's also about realizing that when we see the glamour in other people's lives, that it doesn't mean they're not seeing it back. I guess the way people torture themselves over social media and things like that other people are saying they're showing their glamorous life, and actually we're probably just not showing the boring bits because we don't think anybody's interested. Whereas when something a bit shiny and interesting happens, you do go, oh, thank you for that, or I enjoyed that, or whatever it happens to be. How we tell our stories in our heads and to each other, I found that very telling in a couple of ways, I think, while I was waiting for that train.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I have to say that now almost everyone's life looks appealing to me because it's not mine. I'm not enjoying mine all that much right now. So anyone who's spent the day at the zoo with their kid, or, gone to an art gallery, even though I can still go to art galleries, these things feel like parts of a normal life that I don't have access to anymore. I mean, I do have access at the moment, but I am soon to lose access to a normal life. It just feels like I don't want to live in envy, but I do find myself looking at other people's lives and thinking, wow, imagine. They and not just on social media, but like real life people's lives. Like they're doing something that suggests hope in the future and that they'll be around for another few years. But can I touch just briefly on something else you mentioned, which is the space that you create between things when you put words on a page. And this relates to cancer as well, because I feel like that's part of the reason probably why I write about cancer, is because it separates. The minute I start writing about it, I'm separating myself from the narrative. Does that make any sense? Like I'm distancing myself from the cancer. It does,
but I think for people who are sort of newer to writing and being a writer and what it feels like and how you do it, how would you illustrate that narrative distance? How would you illustrate that experience? That when you put the story down, there's the gap.
I think because when I start to write it, let's say I'm writing about a doctor's appointment. Okay. Like I'm writing about a visit to my oncologist. Once I start writing about it, I'm seeing myself back in the doctor's room with the doctor, but I'm not there. I'm writing about it. So when I'm writing about it, I am writing about what happened in the doctor's office as if I'm an observer. I'm observing it. And if I'm observing it, I can't really be in it at the same time. Does that make any sense?
It does. And I don't know if this is also in there for you, but the thing that it felt like to me was there's a fundamental acknowledgement of subjectivity, which there isn't when you're actually sitting in there, that this is your version of this conversation. And I just to give a slightly different example, in coaching, one of the things that comes up a lot is how we tell those stories to ourselves. You know, some people will say, well, what he said was, and then say the worst possible version of what his words could have meant rather than what he said. Or
right,
she thought, and then insert imagined version. And it may very well be the case, but it also may not, because we're not in there with that other person. And when you're writing about it, you're in the position of commentating. So, for example, in that doctor's surgery, where you, in the situation you're in, you're very aware that their power is, you know, when you describe how they talk to you, that example of the two oncologists disagreeing and how it's like parents disagreeing with each other, the feeling that two people in power disagreeing with each other and how that makes you feel. That was a recent example I read of yours, where that subjectivity is what almost makes the point that the characters in the scene can't quite always see how powerful they are, that when we're too close to our own lives, we almost can't see it anymore.
Yes, that's true. And in addition to that, I think what happens when you're observing or writing about what your version of a conversation, you're doing two things. One is you're trying to make meaning out of it, or at least I'm trying to make meaning out of it. And the other thing is you're trying to tell an entertaining story. If you're writing for Substack, which I do, right? Mm. So I'm not saying I ever make anything up. I do not. But my oncologist may have a different version of our conversations than I do. In fact, sometimes my husband and I come away with different interpretations of things. And I'll say, well, she said this. And he'll say, no, she never said that. I'm like, oh, she may as well have. She pretty much said that. And Tim's like, but she didn't, you know, so they're probably both right in various ways. Like maybe she didn't literally say it, but it was clear that's what she was implying, you know, that sort of thing.
And it's not about getting rid of that, is it? It's not about getting rid of one's own subjectivity. It's about knowing that that's sort of the point. That mug is really cool. This is not relevant to what we're talking about, but I keep looking at that's really beautiful. What is that?
It was
yes.
Now you know what it is.
Yeah. Tell the people who are not watching on YouTube.
It's Van Gogh's little yellow cafe. I've actually been to this cafe. Actually, I have a picture of myself by this cafe in Arles. But this was a gift from someone I met in a hospital several years ago. A very kind person. The hospital had really substandard sized cups that were like this big, and I'm a big mug person.
Right.
Like, you know, like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, this to me, notice the size compared to my head, is a reasonable sized mug for tea or coffee or hot cocoa, whatever. And I have a French friend who comes over, and if I even show it to her, she freaks out. She likes these teeny little, the French like these little teeny espresso cups, right? And they wouldn't know what to do with that. They would like, I don't know, make soup with it or something. But she's like, no, I can't have big mugs. Like the biggest mug in her house is like this big. Anyway, so the hospital had tiny mugs. And so this woman bought us all big mugs so that we could.
It is so beautiful. I realised I said let's go chronologically and then distracted you enormously with all sorts of things. I'm going to do a little bit more chronology if that's okay.
That is okay.
We were in Yemen. You had met Tim. You had been kidnapped. You wrote a police report and then a novel.
I did, yes. Although it wasn't so much police report as a report for the Foreign Office. Then I wrote a novel, and by the time I didn't finish the novel in Yemen, I just started it there. And then my daughter and I were evacuated after my husband was attacked by a suicide bomber on his way to work, which he survived because he was in an armored car. But at that point, my 6-month-old daughter and I were evacuated. Now, we had nowhere else to go. We had no home in Britain. Most people who work for the Foreign Office have a home in Britain, but my husband had just gone through a divorce and lost that home, and we didn't have anywhere to go. So my daughter and I, through a friend I met in Yemen, rented an apartment in Jordan so that Tim could visit us. We weren't too far away, and we lived there on our own for 4 months. Wasn't quite in my plans to raise his child alone for 4 months, but people do it for much longer. So we managed, and then we were all reunited in London when Tim was reposted back there, and we were in London for a couple of years, and then we moved to Bolivia for 4 years, where I found the inspiration for my third book. And then we were back in London for 3 years. And
do you want to talk about the third book?
I knew you were going to say that.
You don't have to.
No, I'd love to talk about the third book. The third book's my favorite. So my third book, called Exile Music, is the story of a family of Viennese musicians who fled Vienna, fled the Nazis in 1939 to find refuge in the Andes, the Bolivian Andes. So there were two germs that started this story. My husband came home from work one day, really early on in our time in Bolivia. We were there between 2012 and 2016. So, or in 2012, towards the end of 2012, Tim came home from work and said, "Did you know there were around 20,000 Jewish refugees living in Bolivia around World War II?" And I hadn't known that. I'd known about Jews living elsewhere in South America, in Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Venezuela, but I didn't know anything about them living in Bolivia, certainly not La Paz. And I thought, well, that's a whole different experience, really, because Bolivia was far less developed than all these other countries. And it also was a very different experience to live at 4,000 feet of altitude, which makes living in La Paz, one of the two capitals of Bolivia, very challenging. And so I thought, gosh, I wonder how they adapted, coming from Vienna, which was a cosmopolitan center of the arts and culture and everything like that back then, a very urban, educated city. And then to find themselves, after losing everyone they loved, everything they owned, all their money, their loved ones, suddenly to end up in a country where they didn't speak the language, where they didn't understand the culture, where altitude can cause severe illness, all these different challenges. And I was curious to hear how they dealt with that. So at first I just looked for novels about it, because I thought surely someone's written about this group of Jews. They can't have been completely ignored by history. But there was not a single novel about this group of Jewish refugees, this part of the diaspora. And I found a bunch of memoirs, most notably Leo Spitzer's memoir, Hotel Bolivia, which was about growing up in Bolivia between the ages of 0 and 10. And that was a beautiful memoir, but it was also limited by his age and the fact that he left when he was 10. And then I read a bunch of other memoirs, a lot of which were self-published just for their family. They'd written it because they wanted to record their experience. They didn't write it because they wanted to win a Pulitzer. They just wanted to make sure no one forgot their stories. And I thought, well, I want to make sure no one forgets their stories too. And how can I draw more attention to this group of Jewish refugees? And so I then met one of the survivors, a guy named John Glartner, who still lives in La Paz, who's a musician and from a part of Poland/Ukraine/USSR, depending on what year it was. And his parents fled to Bolivia. And he introduced me to other survivors, especially a man named Guillermo Wiener, who used to be Wilhelm Wiener, but he moved from Austria to Bolivia when he was 8 years old. And I interviewed him, I think, 3 times. And those were my most significant interviews, I think, when it came to informing the life of my main character, who is a young girl who ends up growing up in Bolivia, because he told me what it was like. He told me how he adapted to Bolivia, how he learned the language, how he integrated himself into the country in a way that not all of this group of Jews did, because for fear of, they had legitimate reasons for fearing outsiders at that time. They trusted mostly each other and stayed in kind of a insular group. But Guillermo wasn't like that. He considered himself fully Bolivian, lived his entire life in Bolivia, never wanted to live anywhere else, raised children and grandchildren in Bolivia. And when Austria invited him back to visit as some kind of apology for having murdered all his people, he said, "No, thank you. I'm Bolivian and I will stay right here." He talked to me about how he learned Spanish from his landlady's children. And of course, my main character of Exile Music ends up learning Spanish from her landlady's one of her landlady's kids, a young boy named Miguel, who becomes a critical part of her story. So the book is about Orly's, my main character's coming of age in Bolivia, but also deals with her trying to figure out where home is and what home means and what her identity is. Is she Bolivian? Is she Austrian? Is she maybe not heterosexual? And she doesn't really have the words for what she is, but she knows that she likes girls. And that's also an issue even today in Bolivia.
And expressed, well, prize-winningly well, in fact. And I'll let you talk about that in a second. But something else that was very much on my mind with this is identity is not about am I this or am I that? It's about all of these pieces are part of me. And the way that you use music as a motif and as really an example of that identity is not just about which piece is more me. You are all of these pieces. And that's something you and I have talked about a lot.
Yes. Which brings us to the word liminal.
Although I did invite you to say the prize-winning bit, and you have escaped that. And almost everyone I talk to avoids mentioning the prizes that they've won. So I have a bet with myself that I don't let you do that.
All right. Shall I say what I had to say about liminal spaces?
You get to do liminal spaces, but you also have to do the prizes. That's the deal.
Okay. So when Rachel was talking about bridges, Orly's often looking for ways to connect her current life with her past, ways to make sense of her life. And in a way, it's on that bridge where she lives. I haven't actually thought of it specifically like that before, but she isn't merely Austrian or Bolivian. She is something in between. She lives her entire life in a culture that wasn't her birth culture, as do I, in a very different way, because I do it by choice and she did it by necessity. But I'm very interested in liminal spaces and as a creative space, as an interesting space, as a non-rigid space,
and it's more real. I mean, there's in terms of sexuality, you one falls in love with this person, one falls in love with that, but it doesn't mean that the other option no longer exists. It's part of the story that you live, who you happen to meet, but it doesn't mean that you are categorically heterosexual or not. It doesn't mean that you are this nationality or not. It's all of those things.
Right. I mean, I'm in the middle of writing on a completely unrelated book. I was writing a scene today about someone who's having an affair, and she's talking with a friend who says, well, why do you have to either be in love with the person you're having an affair with or your husband? Why couldn't you be in love with both of them? And also, while we're talking about this, why do we allow other people to tell us what we can do with our bodies? Why don't we have true sexual freedom? I mean, we're very intent, all of us, at putting borders around our lovers. And I understand there's reasons for this, and there's practicalities about this and all kinds of things. But I do have friends that kind of refuse to do that. They have long-term partners, but they're like, my body's my own. I'll do with it whatever I want. As long as you're okay with that, I would like to have a permanent relationship with you, but it doesn't mean that I won't kiss someone in a bar one night if I feel like it, because it's my body. And I find it's interesting all the ways we try to control each other's bodies. We want to tell each other what to eat and who they can sleep with and who they can't and how they can be touched. And I find that interesting. So Exile Music was a finalist for the Lambda Lesbian Fiction Award, which rocked my world. I was very excited about that. It also was the grand prize winner of the Eyelands International Book Award, and it was finalist in a few others. It was a finalist for the Bisexual Book Award, and oh gosh, I need to
and
look
everybody can look up the rest.
Yeah, you can look up the rest.
Yeah, that's got to be an accolade of itself to not quite remember how many.
Well, yeah, let's not get carried away here, but yeah,
it just happened.
Yeah,
it literally just happened.
But
not getting carried away.
At the same time, it was not. It came out in April 2020, and I'm sure all of you remember April 2020 as being a month during which not much could be done in terms of publicity. I had a 20-city book tour that was canceled, and bookshops hadn't really figured out how to hold online events very productively. And reviewers were so busy covering the pandemic, they weren't reviewing a lot of books at the time. So alas, a lot of people didn't hear about its existence. But I'm grateful that those who have heard about its existence loved it. And I speak to book groups about it all the time, which it makes me so happy because a lot of the people in the book groups have included people who've lived in Bolivia who were among that Jewish population, which made me think, where were you when I was researching this book? But also 2 weeks after it came out, I got a phone call from a 90-year-old man who lives in Florida. And he said, I just read Exile Music and it's so close to my own experience in Bolivia that I can't believe you made it up. Like, who did you talk to? And that to me was the best thing that could have happened because all I really wanted to do was for someone who had lived through that experience to look at it and say, yeah, that's an accurate representation of what we went through. The story is fiction, of course. My family is fiction, but a lot of things that happened to them were things I read about having happened to other people in real life. And I intensively researched this for 5 years. So to the point of, what kinds of food could they get in La Paz? Could they get butter? Could they get meat? Could they get canned foods, which apparently were a luxury item? All these things you have to know if you're going to write a scene that involves cooking or kitchens or eating. And so I wanted people to recognize that context and say, yeah, that's the context in which we went through what we went through. And it was most important to me that the Jewish community have this book as a record of that experience more than anything else, because I wanted to write it for them, to save it for them. And John Glarcher, the first survivor I talked to, his granddaughter invited me to speak to DC 3G, which is like third generation Holocaust survivors in DC. And so I spoke to that group and she said to me, she was like, look, I've wanted this story to be told for so long. I didn't want to have to be the one to tell it. I'm not a writer. And it kind of weighed on me that the story hadn't been told. And now you've done it and I'm free. I don't need to do it myself. So thank you. Because I had worried that, what I was quite wary of is I didn't want anyone to think that I had misrepresented their experience or written about something I shouldn't have. But that was never the case in any of these book groups. So
when one knows what one's why is, that's it really, isn't it? And when we're dealing with memoir in particular, people can get so fundamentally in their own way and go, but is it my story to tell? And the answer is always subjectively. Your story, as we've talked about already, your story is your story and it won't look like somebody else's completely. But that does not do anything to its validity. What from where I'm sitting anyway, what you saw in that story, you knew you could do justice to. And I mean, in terms of voice, I have to say, and I think I've said this to you before, that I very much forgot you weren't Jewish as I was reading it. It felt very, not just when I was reading it actually, but it felt very familiar in that deep way. And what I put that down to is that it felt that way to you, that you had gone in there, you had said this story deserves telling and I will do the things. And I wonder how much the journalism background is sort of, it feels to me like very good training, not only for getting the damn thing done because there's going to be a deadline and you need to do the thing, that side of journalism, but also I don't know emotionally how this does or doesn't resonate, but does the journalism background, do you think, help you step away from being too precious about things, saying I'm going to do this as best I can, but that's all we can do? Do you think that comes into it?
Well, my journalism background is immeasurably helpful in so many ways. And yes, I suppose that is one way. I'm not, when I write a first draft, I just try to get the first draft down. I don't get worked up about every single word. I know some people do, but that's not how I do it. Because after I have it all down, then I can make it beautiful. But if I thought I had to get it beautiful in the first draft, it would just never get done. But I need to sort out what the story is, and then I'll know what kind of details I need to put along the way that will be breadcrumbs that add up to a loaf by the end or something like that. But I also think, like, in terms of the research for this book, I mean, a lot of the research I did kind of growing up with Jewish friends and then covering a Jewish community in Borough Park, Brooklyn. It was an Orthodox community, so quite different from the Jews of Austria during the time who were largely secular. But I spent a lot of time in that community to the point where they decided I was Jewish. They were like, you must be Jewish because we like you. So
It's more than,
Therefore,
maybe that's one of the reasons I felt like that. I like her socially. But the thing is, so many of my friends are not, that it's something else as well. And I'm not even going to try and say what it is because I don't know what it is, but it's definitely there. Because I remember during lockdown when I met you through the Society of Authors on the online monthly meetings, I definitely got that vibe off you and we became friends through that. And since then, we've done sponsored writes together. I can't even think how many it actually is now, but a few.
Three, I think.
Yeah. It feels like more. But yeah, and you've been part of that community, but I'm conscious you're part of an awful lot of writing communities and writing friendships. And what's that been like? What do you look for, or what do you find in your writing communities?
I'm going to talk about this writers/teachers conference I went to recently in Paris. So there's an organization I belong to called the European Association of Creative Writing Programs. And so a lot of the members are universities all over Europe, including Britain. We still think of Britain as Europe, whether or not it's part of the EU.
Yeah, because I actually messaged you about that, didn't I, when I was applying to them? I said, could you just please prove to me that I'm still a European, even though I'm...
Yeah, no, you are European, whether you like it or not. You are all
I was
European.
grateful for the capital letters. It was deeply reassuring. Yes.
Oh, good. Yes, definitely. And definitely we have people from University of East Anglia who are our university, they're members, and I see them all the time. But what's been fascinating to me about this particular group is that not only is everyone writers, but everyone is some kind of educator. That doesn't mean they're at a university. They might work with disabled children. They might work in schools. They might have their own private programs they offer. So it could be any kind of, I am not currently, well, actually, I've got private clients I'm editing right now, but I'm not really teaching in any sense right now because I can do one-on-one stuff, but for me to commit to a regular class in the middle of all my medical appointments is hard. I'm always willing to try. This community I love for many reasons. One is because when we had this conference in Paris, you go to all the other writers' workshops, and what they're teaching about is it's a writing workshop, but it's also on how to teach the writing workshop to your own students. So it's kind of, there's two levels to it. But I kind of go a lot of the time as a writer, forgetting that I'm also a teacher. And I learned so many new ways to approach my own writing and to help the clients I work with approach their own writing in new ways. It's amazing. There's infinite new ways to think about your writing. And especially because all these people are from different cultures and they all have I'm telling you, they all have very different ways of teaching creative writing. I went to a workshop by this Finnish guy and I was mystified by the way he was talking about his creative writing teaching. I just thought, wow, okay, this is not how it's taught in the United States or anywhere else I've been, but okay, that's interesting. But it's exciting for me to get the stimulation. So for me, like writing community is about being stimulated by other people's ideas and then stealing them to do something with your own work. And also, like, I produce a lot of writing at these because there's always writing exercises in the workshops. So you always come away with bits of new writing that you might end up doing something with. At very least, writing a Substack. Yeah. Yeah.
Can we stay with the word stealing for a minute? Because I enjoy this. Now, we don't talk about Neil Gaiman as freely as we used to, but he was, in credit where it's due, the first person that I heard talk about the ideas as a compost heap, that when you hear somebody else's on it goes and then it grows back as something slightly different. It's so what, like, I have my quotes book, as you know, that I love, and putting dialogue prompts and strange and silly things I've heard, but they only ever go into the work as a new thing that has shot up from that. Is that what it feels like for you, or is it different for you?
I probably should be more structured about how I gather things. My notebooks are not in any sort of order. They're just, if anyone ever tries to write a biography, they're going to have a hell of a time piecing everything together because my notebooks just aren't chronological. And I also go back and forth between writing by hand and writing on my computer, even in my journal. So like part of my journal, and some journal entries will be on my computer, some will be on paper. And it'll make it hard. It makes it hard for me to look back and find things. But I find that like right after a conference like this, when it's fresh, I write it, it's all in handwriting and I put it all on my computer afterwards, which gives me a second think through of everything. And then I might take a piece that I started during one of these workshops and work on it. or it might give me an idea I want to expand on. And so I try to do that right after a community gathering like that. I mean, this is a group of people who are also hugely, hugely social and do an awful lot of drinking. And a lot of them are up till 4 a.m. and they'll come to the workshops the next morning. It's slightly worse for wear. And of course, I'm in bed at 9. So I just have to accept that right now and let them have their great evening, and I'll be perky in the morning and annoy them. But I just really I feel like all the people there, every conversation I had at every coffee hour, I felt like we immediately go to a deep level. We understand each other in a very deep way because we're all writers. We're all there because we appreciate community, because we want to share ideas, because we want to borrow ideas. And I find that I feel like I'm with an extended family every time I'm there. And I feel that way also with NAWE, with the NAWE conference in the UK, the National Association of Writers in Education, which is also a wonderful group of writers and educators. So I like being around them. I think other than that, I mean, my relationships with other writers tend to be very one-on-one, like my relationship with you. Like, we're not in a group together. We have an individual relationship. And I think a lot of my writer friends I'm like that with rather than in a group. And partly that's also a factor of my life is I don't live in an Anglophone country. Therefore, my entire Anglophone writing community is scattered around the world, which is frustrating to me.
I think that's been something that's been very important to me, that leading the Writers' Gym and seeing those same people every weekday, being on Voxer with them, being there to goal set, to celebrate the boundaries that we've established in life in order to get the writing time that is just the side of our lives that is just ours. You know, I think is very valuable. And that thing that you talk about of coming into the space to share and to develop whatever is uniquely you. I feel very, very privileged to be one of those at the heart of that. And listening to you talk about it, I'm also conscious that part of that in all of these examples is how we choose to own our energy. So going to bed at 9 o'clock because that is what you need to do is important to give you I don't know enough about your routine to say this, but the getting the sleep or getting the downtime that you need in order that writing can happen, treatment can happen. Knowing what are a good idea of boundaries for you is important for writers in all circumstances. And I'm wondering if that's something that, not just because of treatment for cancer, but to do with being a writer already, is that something you've thought about a lot, or is that just what happens naturally?
I've thought about this a lot, partly because, every time I miss a late night in the bar, I do have FOMO. I'm worried I'm missing out on important bonding, etc. But I also know that if I go, I'm not going to be at my best. I'm going to be exhausted, and it will steal my morning. And for me, mornings are the most important part of my day. Mornings for me are when everything happens. I get up, first thing I do is write. Because if I don't write first thing, I have no idea what to do. I just stand there looking confused. So I just have to know what I'm going to do when I wake up. And I know I go up and I go straight to the computer. Oh, that's a lie. I go straight to the tea kettle, make the tea or the coffee, then go to the computer. But that's when my brain is freshest. And that's when I can work on things. And when I sit down, like in the evening, like let's say I sit down in the evening to write, which is not when I normally write, but I think, okay, I feel okay. I'm going to sit down. I struggle. I mean, if I'm on deadline, I'll do it. It's not like I can't write in the evening if that's the only time that's available to me. But I know I'm more productive in the morning. And so I like to preserve that. And I also have a pretty strict exercise regime in the morning. So,
and I mean, you have been amazing me with this for years, and the ballet and the yoga. And do you want to tell people, sort of give a bit of historical background to quite how many things there are in that, because it's fascinating?
Well, I mean, it all started when I was a runner, and that's what got me addicted to exercise, because I loved running more than anything on this earth. I loved running. I ran every day, but I injured myself so badly training for the marathon in New York in 1996 that I still ran the marathon, mind you, and I finished the marathon, but I just never recovered well enough to be able to run again. So then I switched to swimming. and then got tendonitis in every part of my body, and then switched to other forms of exercise, walking, yoga, etc. And it took me a long time, because I'm a slow learner, to understand that you can't keep doing the same thing over and over and not get repetitive stress injuries, which is what I kept doing to myself. I was like, I found this exercise. I love it. I'm going to do it every day. And I would do it 7 days a week, which is not healthy. Anyone will tell you. You need cross training. You need days of rest. And I just didn't take days of rest ever, because I depended psychologically on that exercise. But what I wish, if I could tell my younger self anything, it would be mix it up, take days off. Otherwise, you're going to lose all the things you love. You're going to lose running. You're going to lose swimming, etc. So now I will do yoga, I will do ballet, I will do Pilates, but I won't do them necessarily all on the same day. And I do a lot of hiking when it's not 37 degrees, which it is right now. So I'm trying to be a little smarter about my obsession, but it is really important for my mental health more than ever. It helps me get through the day. You know, there's writing followed by exercise, followed by lunch, followed by writing for the rest of the afternoon. That's my general day. But if I don't move my body, I am unbewithable, if that's a word.
Oh, it very much is now, and a very useful one for writers, I think.
Yeah.
You've talked in Liminal on Substack about your unbewithableness. I'll not go too far in
right.
developing that word, but I think from the point of view of a writing routine, you've illustrated how the morning is, I guess in my language, it's sort of when there's a direct line. When in the morning the zone is closer, you can get into the zone more. And I mean, we will also talk about cancer treatment and Macmillan and any and all of that if you're up for that. But I guess there's the bit where I know for myself, mental health, when done best, involves quite a lot of time where it's just me and writing. The other things go better when there is that core of me doing the writing. You get better Rachel for your money if Rachel is doing the writing regularly. So I certainly relate to that, and I'm sure probably everybody listening to this relates to that. So it sounds like you're making sure that happens, and and you see the benefits to your mental health. But it's also about making the right space for other people so that it works for you, that you're not sort of starving yourself of other people or them of you, but you know that you need the mental space in order to make the best of being with others. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm much more relaxed hanging out with my family if I've done these things. Both my husband and daughter know my exercise routine. They know that I'm pretty useless before it. They won't bother to try to stop me from doing it. However, over the years, because I do have a child, I have had to be flexible and sometimes move things a little later in the day than I'd like them to be. Fortunately, I am usually still the first person up in the morning. So I still have now I have a teenager who sleeps in instead of a toddler who is up at daybreak. So now I have the house to myself when I wake up, which is a luxury. But there are days where I have to be a little more flexible. And also, I have to say, trains are the best places to write because, first of all, the internet never works and you just can't be on it, and you might as well be making good use of your time. And when else are you going to have 3 hours of uninterrupted writing time without a partner or a child or a waitress or anyone interrupting you? That's only on trains. And so I actually have loved making use of my commutes to Paris every week by writing on the trains, because that way the commute the trips don't feel like wasted time.
And just to clarify that Paris is where you're having the chemotherapy.
Yeah. So just as a quick overview, so I have ovarian cancer that I've had since April 2022. But actually, I had it 4 years before then, but it wasn't diagnosed till April 2022, which is why it's become much harder to treat. So I've been through all the lines of available treatment, and none of them have kept my cancer away for more than a few months. So I'm now at the point where my doctors have nothing else to offer me except clinical trials. So there is a major research hospital in Paris, Gustave Roussy, which is allegedly the third best cancer hospital in the world. So I'm starting a clinical trial there next Tuesday, which I'm quite anxious about, and I have a lot of mixed feelings about. And I also have a lot of mixed feelings about commuting while on chemo. And I know that once I start chemo, writing on trains will not necessarily be what I do on trains. I may be sleeping on trains. I might be trying not to vomit for 3 hours on a train. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be, I don't know what it'll be like. I mean, I've been through this kind of chemo before, but this time it's combined with immunotherapy, which has never yet worked in cancer. And who knows? I could be the first one, right? This is a first in humans trial, so I am quite literally a guinea pig.
And that starts next Tuesday.
It does. And I know that this is going to seriously hinder my writing time, which is partly why I'm trying to get so much done right now, because I want to there's a novel I'm trying to finish before my brain is affected by chemo.
Was this the novel you were working on during your PhD? Which I realise we have not even mentioned.
Right. So that one, I've got 2 novels out on submission right now. One is the one I wrote for my PhD, The Underside. And one is a book called The Museum of Forbidden Art, which is set in Uzbekistan and combines the devastation of the Aral Sea with the development of a young artist in northwestern Uzbekistan, in Karakum, Pakistan, and kind of Igor Savitsky, who amassed the second largest collection of Soviet avant-garde art in the world in the middle of nowhere in Karakum, Pakistan, managing to elude the Soviet officials who had banned this kind of art. So it's about him, about his relationship with this girl who grows up to be an artist. It will surprise no one to find out that she ends up falling in love with a woman who happens to be Jewish. So there's some recurring themes in my work. But anyways, so both of those books are out on submission. It's a tricky time for literary fiction right now. So far, we're having really, really positive responses from editors who say, we love it. It's an untold story. I had no idea any of this was going on. But it's a little too literary for our tastes or our lists. They say it like that. Or, we don't think it'll sell at airports. So that's tough. I really hope I sell these 2 books before I die, because that means everything to me. I'd also like to leave my family with a little bit of income. But anyway, so those are in progress. And the book I'm working on now is actually something I wrote years ago and was terrible. And I have torn apart the whole thing, and I'm rewriting it because I love the characters. I love their community, and it's set in New York. And I think I just want to spend time in New York, and I can't actually go there. So I might as well write a book there. I mean, all my other books are set in foreign countries, which is partly why it's hard to sell them, because Americans don't want to read books set in foreign countries. By and large, if you listen to the marketing people. Yeah.
So you get to go to New York in your head.
I get to go to New York in my
Probably
head,
the only way a lot of us will go there anytime soon, for one reason or another.
Yeah. For fear of the authoritarian regime taking over the country. I'm not even gonna try and. Yeah. No, we can't do it justice.
Oh, we can do it in sound effects. We can go. Ugh.
I'm doing it in facial expressions.
Yeah, that. Yeah.
Okay, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, that is definitely the theme. So we met online, and then you joined the annual Green Ink sponsored write for Macmillan Cancer Support, and you have a lot more experience of them than I do. I started this in memory of my friend Sophie in 2009 in a different form to what it is now, but I've done something for them because it was her choice. So it was kind of a blind date, me and Macmillan. I did it for her originally, and then obviously through Andy, my officer, and through all the things we've done, I've learnt more about it. But I'm conscious that there will be people out there who know not very much about it. So from your experience when you were here and you were talking to them about various things, what was your experience with them?
My most profound experience was with the Macmillan nurses. So when you are a cancer patient on the NHS in London, at least in Imperial, which is the trust that I was treated under when I was in London, I was in treatment in London for the first 18 months I had cancer. Then I went to Uzbekistan. Then I came back to London for a few months. And then I finally got care in France. So I've had quite a bit of cancer care in the UK. And a pivotal part of cancer care in the UK was they give you, these Macmillan nurses give you their card, Macmillan card, and you can call or write your nurses any hour of the workday with any question you want. It can be about symptoms you're having, about a question you have for your doctor, about something you're worried about the fact that you're falling apart emotionally. You can call them for any reason, and they make this clear. And I did call them for any reason and every reason. I felt very safe as a patient that I could get messages to my doctors, I could get messages to my team. Whereas here, there are no Macmillan nurses, and I have to go through the secretaries of my doctors, who are not always interested in being helpful because their main goal seems to be protecting the doctors from hearing from patients. And so I found them, sometimes I would call them and I would just cry on the phone, and they were great. They were empathic and helpful and gave me advice, reassured me about certain symptoms, things like that. Or they got a doctor to ring me. And if a doctor didn't ring me, I'd call them and they would get the doctor to ring me. So I relied heavily on Macmillan nurses during that time. I also, I did look into, Macmillan offers a lot of benefits they offer help signing up for government benefits and things like that. I didn't personally benefit from that part. I did talk to them about it, but because of our complicated circumstances, my husband was still working for the Foreign Office and working in Uzbekistan. We didn't have a UK residence, and it became too difficult administratively to file any sort of claim for help with like a disability claim. We tried to file a disability claim, which I qualified for. I qualified for disability. But anyway, we weren't able to do that. But Macmillan will help you do that to the best of their ability. And that is a great service. And they will point you towards other places you can look for financial help. And, I think they offer support for families as well. And
that was something that has come across to me very clearly, is that there's no such thing as irrelevant. You can phone, you can ask them questions about your financial life, you can ask them questions about your sex life, you can be the whole of being a human. You don't you don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I asked them questions about all of that. And yeah, it was good to know that they were there. And I wish I had a team like that here in France, but it's just not how things work here.
When I was talking to my Macmillan officer, Andy Gould, one of the things that I think comes up for people is some people think they need to know why they're phoning. And actually, sometimes you just need to phone and go, rah. You don't have to know exactly what it is that you need at any given time. You can just reach out, which I think is important.
I mean, there are people with cancer who don't have anyone to talk to. I recently in Paris, I met a guy. He was the front desk clerk of somewhere I was staying, and he told me that he worked for 4 years accompanying cancer patients, to their appointments, because these were people with cancer who didn't have relatives or friends who could take them to appointments or who would take them to appointments. And so he did that. He went with them. And that's a problem. I mean, I've been really lucky in that my husband has been able to come with me to all my appointments here in France thus far. He's not going to be able to come to any of my Parisian appointments because we can't afford his train fare. But he has come with me to all my appointments. And in the hospital, most of the patients are women, and most of them are alone. They don't have a partner there. They don't have anyone to hold their hand or to read them stories or talk to them or listen to their concerns. And, they'll try to talk to the nurse once they're in treatment, but the chemo nurses are run off their feet. They're run off their feet. They're amazing, but in both Britain and France, they are absolutely unable to stop for a minute. They just don't have the time. So that's why the Macmillan nurses are so critical.
So it is a case of don't feel like you even need to know why you're phoning. Phone. Reach out if you want to reach out. We talked about Liminal, which is your Substack newsletter, which is absolutely phenomenal. I'm going to fangirl for a minute. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about that. Not just with the novels and the memoir, and the journalism, but with the relatively new newsletter. Among the many things I would love to know is, are you a layering person? Because when I approach my Substack newsletters and various other things, I find it easier to go, here is the base layer, and then I will come back later and layer up. Is that what happens to you, or are you a blitz it and get it out there person? What's it like for you?
Depends on the week. I liked, in the beginning, I actually had like the next 3 written. That doesn't happen anymore. Not ever. But I like to give myself a little bit of time to edit, because every time I step away from what I've written and then I come back at it, I know that I will make changes. And so I try not to write it at the very last minute and then just hit send. But for me, rather than layering in things, usually what I do is subtract things, because I am someone who writes in too much detail sometimes. Like, I will write everything that happened to me in the hospital, and I'll realize, actually, they don't need to know every single thing. And it probably still sounds like I'm telling every single thing, but I'm not. There's a lot I'm leaving out. So I will try to edit out the things that I think might slow people down a bit. I also want to make it clear that Liminal is not just about cancer. It's about all liminal spaces. And I've been heavily focused on cancer lately for the obvious reasons, but I do always talk about books, and I try to write about other things. I wrote about this conference in Paris. I write about what it's like to raise a child in France. Yeah, don't do it.
Spoiler alert.
The school system is a nightmare. Anyway, so I write about a lot of those things. And I would like to not just be writing about cancer. Right now, things have been happening so fast that there's a lot of updates. So I have been updating a lot about cancer, but I kind of hope there'll come a time when I can write fewer cancer updates and more about other things. And occasionally, and this might happen when I'm in chemo, if there are weeks I'm too sick to write, that maybe I could have some more. I've had a couple of guest columnists come and write about their own experience with liminality. Like, I had a writer friend who is African-American and Mexican-American, and she wrote about what that was like, because her African-American identity is visible and her Mexican-American identity is not visible, and what to do when another African-American says something derogatory about Mexicans, just things like that. And she wrote about that. Yeah. And my friend Michi wrote a column. She's Japanese American. And so she wrote about what that was like, living between those cultures. And she's also a musician. And anyway, so I'm interested in other people's experiences with liminality, with living. Those 2 experiences that those 2 writers have aren't experiences I have had or could have. So that's why it's nice to have guest columnists, because you can have people who have experiences of liminality that are experiences you can't have, and you don't have to offer.
And it's so well timed saying that, because without going into exactly why, something that I have seen happening on social media is, I quoted something that essentially said, just because one bad thing is happening doesn't mean another thing is bad too. And I got this vitriol about how I was ignoring the fact that the first thing was a bad thing. And I kept quoting, this is a line from the middle of it, but they're so, they want to believe I think a certain thing for, I'm not going to say what reasons, who knows. And where they go with that is binary thinking. They go to goodies and baddies, which helps nobody. Binary is not useful in any kind of identity, political, sexual, anything. Nuance is useful, and the more we lose nuance, the more we lose dialogue, the more we lose communication, the more we lose connection. So yeah, I hope everybody goes to read Liminal.
And we are losing that. We are losing our ability to live in the gray areas. Like, I feel, it's just, there are subjects you cannot discuss with any sort of complexity, because you're either on one side or the other, and everything you say is going to be taken by one of the 2 sides to mean something and the other side to mean something. And, whereas you just really want to just talk about it and think things through, and people want to jump to conclusions. They want to be able to put you in a box and know and decide what you think about something. And so, there's so much, I don't ever comment on anything on social media anymore, because it's just pointless. Frankly, anyone who follows me on social media is probably on my political team. So I don't need to spout politics into the echo chamber. It's obvious from everything I write where I stand. But, when it comes to like other global issues with other countries, there are people that are educated in those countries to talk about those. And that's just not my territory. So I don't feel a need to weigh in on everything.
And something that was quite helpful that somebody said to me the other day was, whereas there are people saying if you're not weighing in, then you should be. And actually what I'm choosing to do and what I feel you're choosing to do is be useful, be part of the dialogue in the ways that you can be useful, offer people something that you have, and build connection, build the world as we want it to be. That's not useless. That's the opposite of useless. That's why we're here.
I mean, if you're going to force me to comment on something I'm not actually qualified to comment on, it's going to be something idiotic. And I don't really want to be pushed into talking about something I don't feel prepared to discuss, and that I feel like deserves someone who's more qualified and knows the history better than I do, for example. I was just going to say that when I think about home, what home means to me is just Tim and Theodora, because the physical spaces we inhabit keep changing, much to my teenage daughter's regret. But anywhere I'm with them, I'm at home. And that could be in a tiny London apartment where Theodora sleeps in a closet, or it could be in a big house in Bolivia, or it could be in this rambling medieval stone house we're in now. Or it could be a hospital room. But if I have them around, I feel like, okay, I'm at home. Because historically, we couldn't rely on being in one place. You know, Theodora's never lived. Since Tim and I met, we've never lived anywhere that we didn't know we were going to leave. Ever. Every single place we lived, we knew we were going to leave in either 1 year or 3 or 4. And I liked that a lot. And that worked for me because everything I found to complain about, I knew would disappear in 4 years. And so it wasn't permanent. I'd be like, okay, I'm complaining about the altitude, the construction, the whatever, but I'm not going to be here in 4 years. I'm going to be somewhere else where I will have new things to complain about. So nothing's permanent. Therefore, like, I'm allowed to not get too worked up about whether or not I love the place or hate the place. I mean, I've loved every place. I have things to appreciate about every place, but I don't get mired in the problems of the place. And now that we're in France and we don't have any plans to move, although that could change since my treatment's largely moving to Paris, it's really going to make holding our family together really, really difficult because I don't know how we can afford to move to Paris. But if I have to go through all my treatments alone up there, I'm never going to see my family. So I don't know. It's complicated. But now that we're in this house that we're not planning to leave, Theodora and I are having a reaction like, well, we want to leave. We've been here long enough now. Like, where are we going to go next? But my husband's now retired, so there is no next place to move. And for my daughter, that makes her feel trapped. And for me, it makes me feel trapped. And part of that is also the fact that she and I have both realized that we're city people. We want to be in a big city. We want to be in London or Paris or New York. Like, those are where we want to be. We want to be in places where we have communities and where we can go to the theater all the time and see art shows and see friends and join communities and the communities of people we see in person and go to free lectures and do all the things that are available in cities. Sit in a coffee shop and write. And like, we're in rural France. It's very different. I don't like having to use a car to get places. I hate it. I want to either walk or take the metro. I do not want to be in a car for any length of time. Being in a car makes me feel like I'm destroying the planet, and it makes me feel sick to my stomach, and it feels like wasted time because I can't work in the car. So like, everything about the car I hate, and everything about the train I love. And I'm a public transport kind of person. And so I think, well, why am I here? But then the logistics of trying to get somewhere else is tough. So I don't know. We're always kind of caught in these quandaries, and we don't really know how things are going to shake out. And my worry is that, I mean, I think being away from my family during all my treatments is going to be tough.
Yeah.
I've done that before. I did it for 18 months in London while my family was in Uzbekistan, and it worked out, but I don't want to do it again.
No, being together, the outside world being liminal rather than each other.
Yeah, I mean, I think previously I was able to stand it because I actually thought I was going to beat this. I had this illusion that I was going to beat this incurable cancer, right? And it just didn't even occur to me that it would kill me. Whereas now my doctors are like Stop asking us for hope. There is no hope. I don't stop asking for hope. In fact, that's why I'm doing a trial, because it's the embodiment of hope. We wouldn't be doing a trial if they didn't hope it would do something, right? But because I feel at a very different place in my cancer than I was when I was in London, it feels more important to be with my family now.
I am going to say the address for the sponsored write to support Macmillan. Can you then say the address for Liminal and anywhere else people can go to support you and your writing? This year's Green Ink sponsored write can be found at justgiving.com/page/somewhere-that's-green. And this year's title was chosen by Rhianna Pratchett. And the full title is Somewhere That's Green, Paradises, Utopias and Happy Places, which I'm sure some of the writers will be subverting. And it can go wherever any of us want it to go, because that's the whole thing. The writers are sponsored for their time and not for their word count. Tell us your websites.
Yes, and if places. I would love it if you wanted to subscribe to Liminal, which is at jennifersteil.substack.com. So Jennifer Steil, JenniferSteil.substack, spelled like it sounds, .com.
All of which will also be in the show notes, but we like to say it.
Yeah. So yes. And you can subscribe for free. There is also you can subscribe and pay if you feel like supporting my work, or you can subscribe for free if you aren't able to do that. And I'm very happy to welcome you, whatever you choose.
Every single newsletter I have had from you, I have had insight into writing and being a writer, and what it feels like for somebody who is enormously articulate and so able to the things that you can do, the sort of the power and the powerlessness. Sometimes it's about cancer and cancer treatment. Sometimes it's about the art life. You get so much value from it. So thank you for that.
Thank you. That's really good to hear. That's really good to hear. I love hearing from people who read it, because when you send it out there, you're never sure if anyone reads it or if they just leave it in their email inbox, So it's great because people are busy. I get that, but it's great to hear from people who actually read it.
So one little point, final point on that. You heard it here, probably not first, but I hope you heard it here definitively. Writers want to know when our work has meant something. So do get in touch with Jennifer on Liminal. Do get in touch with me on Encouragement. Do comment here, reach out, because we're all just humans doing our best. And this is always good to know when stuff we do reaches people. So Jennifer Steil, thank you so much for joining the Writers' Gym.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be part of the Writers' Gym. And I wish I could get to the workouts more often, but I will keep trying.
Well, we're here all the time. It's been a delight having you on the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You've visited the Writers' Gym with author and coach Dr. Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory. To join a Writers' Gym workout online or in London as a guest or as a member, visit writersgym.com or email thewritersgym@rachelknightley.com.